Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. How's everybody doing today? Hey. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'll let a couple people get in here and then we're going to go ahead and get started today. It has definitely been a long week, for sure. So we're going to get started in a bit. I'm going to cover a number of different things today. More focused on the history of corporate structures because I think it's kind of important before we get into how you form a corporate structure, what corporate structures are about, what the differences are, what the pros and cons are, etc., etc. I think that it is a good idea to give you a bit of the history so you kind of understand how this works and kind of how you have to look at things, because when you run a business, it's not just about understanding the technical details of how that goes. Starting a business is much more than technical details. Starting a business is about understanding the various aspects of what it takes to actually run a business. So you've got to look at the economic factors. You've got to look at the industry factors. You've kind of got to look at the political factors. And to be able to understand that properly, you kind of got to understand how this thing started. So, that is what I am going to cover today. Can everybody see me okay? Can everyone see me? Let's see here. If I go like this, okay, no. And if I go like this, okay, I think everybody can see me. I think we should be good to go. Okay, so first of all, as I always say, when we get started, at the end of the day, if you have any questions, please feel free to hit the question mark button in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. So that way, we can go ahead and I can get some questions answered at the end. I'm happy to see everybody today. Happy to, be in here today. At the end of the day, I know I missed 2 weeks, and as you can see, I'm still wearing the week on my face. How I feel is definitely reflective in all of this. It has been a long, stressful week, but I knew I had missed 2 weeks with you guys, and I definitely wanted to make sure that I touch base, with my viewership and make sure that, we have an opportunity to catch up and get back into this. So, for future references, before I go ahead and get off into this thing, if you turn your notifications on, then you'll be able to know when I'm going live, and you'll be able to join the courses and, learn some of the information that I have to put out. So now, let's go ahead and get started in this. Now, when we talk about understanding corporate structures, right? As I was saying in the beginning, It's very important that you understand the history, and that's what we're going to talk about today, because the history actually directly affects African Americans and Africans in general, right? So this history is extremely important to understand, because when you are setting up a business in this country, you kind of need to understand that history so you can understand how these laws work, how they function, and how they're developed and designed, which a lot of is what we're going to talk about today. So let's go ahead and get right into this. So first of all, what is a corporate entity? So it's important for us to understand what a corporate entity is. And so when I say corporate entity, I'm saying business. So corporate entity means business. You'll hear the words corporate structure. It's the same thing. It is, and so what is a corporate entity? So let's talk about that. A corporate entity is a legal structure that is formed in accordance with the laws of a state or country that is used to carry out a business initiative, and in almost all instances provides a limit of liability to the individual person or persons who formed it. A corporate entity is separate from the person who formed it. Think of it like a separate person, so to speak, with its own social security number, known as an employer identification number, or EIN, in the United States. So that's what a corporate entity is, right? So a corporate entity is a completely separate thing from the person that sets it up, and that's what gives you the limit of liability, right? And so understanding how corporate entities work and how they differ is very important. So almost all corporate entities give you that limit of liability, with the exception of sole proprietorships. But we'll cover that. That's what our next course is about. We're going to get into the different types of corporate entities. Now, so check this out, right? Now, in the United States, corporate entity formations are done at the state level, right? So that means every single state has its own Secretary of State that you go through to be able to set up a corporate structure, like an LLC or a C corporation or a nonprofit organization or a limited partnership. You form those in the states, right? So you pick a state and you incorporate in that state by paying the filing fee, filing the articles of organization, filing the shareholder registry in some states, etc., right? A process that we're going to get into as we progress in this course. Now, so in the United States, they're formed at the state level. There is no entity formation governed by the federal government. So there's no way to set up a corporation with the federal government that covers all states. You simply have to incorporate in a state. Now, in almost every other country, right, because it's different in other countries, in almost every other country, a corporate entity is formed at the federal level. So, for example, if you incorporate in the Cayman Islands, for example, you're not incorporating with Grand Cayman or Cayman Brac or anything like that. You're actually incorporating with the government, the federal government of the Cayman Islands, right? Canada, for example, has an interesting structure whereby you can do a federal incorporation or you can do a provincial incorporation. So a provincial incorporation is like Vancouver, you have, not Vancouver, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Alberta. These are provinces. And so you can incorporate your company via a provincial incorporation, or you can incorporate via a federal incorporation. So that's how it works in Canada. But primarily, every other country, you incorporate at the federal level. So, the United States is very unique in the fact that you can actually incorporate at a state level, not a federal level. And it's always been that in the United States, and it's unlikely to change. You know what I mean? So now, let's walk into this a little bit further. So now let's talk about the history of corporations, because I think it's very important that we talk about this history, right? Because the history is going to blow your mind, right? Especially as a black person, right? When you understand the corporate structure and the history of corporate structures, as a black person, it hits you a little bit different, right? Because it opens your eyes to the reality of what this is for us, right? So the first recorded corporation to ever have been formed was the East Indian Company, and it was set up by royal charter granted by Queen Elizabeth I in 1600. So the first ever recorded corporation in the world was actually done in England, and it was the East Indian Company. And so, I did a little research, right? Because that's what I like to do. I do a little research, right? Because I want to provide the facts as they are. So what the partners did that started this company, this first ever company, right? They combined their personal stock, turning it into company stock, and thereby created the world's first commercial corporation. So the first company that ever had the ability to issue stocks, the first company that was ever set up for the benefit of being a corporation, was in England, the East Indian Company. Now, here's the thing. The East Indian Company was an import-export business who initially engaged in the trade from England to Asia. They exchanged gold from England for spices from Asia. So the first ever corporation ever created was an import-export business. It was a trading business, right? So that, but it gets interesting. Check this out, right? So in the 17th and 18th century, given the rapid expansion of the East Indian Company's trading empire, they began to rely heavily on slave labor and began to export slaves from East and West Africa, particularly Mozambique and Madagascar. The East Indian Company pioneered the exporting of Africans to other parts of the world for the sole purpose of slave labor. They are the genesis of what became known as the transatlantic slave trading enterprises, such as the Royal African Company. And the Royal African Company actually had the largest slave trading empire and business in the world at that time as they grew. Now, so check this out, right? So we're going to stop there for a second and we're going to talk about that. Let's discuss that, right? Because this has implications even today, right? And this is why I like to go through the history before I begin to go through the process of structuring, right? History is important. So what we see here is that the first company ever formed in the world was in the business of trade, import, export. They built their business, they built their empire, they built their success, right, on the backs of slave labor. And not just any slave labor, the exportation of Africans from the African American continent to other parts of the world, specifically for slave labor, right? They are the pioneer of the transatlantic slave trading enterprises. They were the first. They were the first. So what you see here is that corporations were not introduced to us as black people as an ownership enterprise, as an opportunity for us to own a business. The first introduction of a corporate structure to Africans and thereby African Americans was actually as a commodity. We were introduced to the corporate structure as commodities, as products, as tradable instruments, as tradable human capital that could be used, right, for the benefit of making someone else wealthy. And that someone else wasn't the same color as us. These were Europeans. So let's be very clear about that, right? We need to understand that, because that history right there translates into how the laws work to this day. So we need to talk about this, right? So now let's dive a little deeper into this history, because it blows your mind when you really look at it, right? So the East Indian Company also had its own army, which by the 1800s had 200,000 soldiers, which were more than twice the membership of the British Army. This company had a bigger army than England did. How about that? So what you see here is a marriage, right? The corporation marrying into kind of like creating kind of a partnership between the federal government, which at that time was the Queen, and the corporation. Welcome to... Get this out. Welcome to how things work now, right? See, And we're going to get into this a little bit more today. But what you learn about the United States and what you learn about most countries around the world is that they're not true democracies. They're not. And if you really look at it, right, we are a plutocracy. We are a government set up by business for the benefit of business. Think about it, right? Yes, every vote matters. That's a fact of life. You should vote. But how is it that these politicians are getting the money to run all these ads, to hire all these people, campaign staffers, and pay campaign staffers? Where are they getting the money to be able to have people knocking on doors, to run polls? Where do you think that money comes from? Because though you may vote, most of the consumer voting demographic doesn't actually donate money to campaigns. So where does the money come from? Hi, it comes from business. It comes from businesses. It comes from political action committees. And businesses, corporations, right, have the ability to donate unlimited amounts of money towards campaigns. Political action committees are allowed to provide unlimited amounts of indirect support to a political campaign. So what you see here is, because media influences decision, right? So that's what you learn. You learn that the media influences decision. So if media influences decision, then it's safe to say that the corporations that are spending the most money, right, to put the most ads out have the greatest probability of the candidate that they're putting in play, that they want to win, actually winning. And when that candidate wins, of course, right, then now they owe favors to these businesses. And so they craft legislation, they craft political agendas, and they craft tax legislation and tax benefits that benefit the very businesses that help them get there, right? So while, yes, voting matters, and yes, it is the common electorate that picks the president, are you really picking the person you really want to pick? Or are you picking the person you see the most? So you see how even from back in the history, you saw how it wasn't so much the electorate, because they didn't have elections back then. You had a queen, and the queen ruled until she died, and then, it passed to her children, etc., etc. But back then it was about armies. Whoever had the biggest army could make the biggest war, could win the most territory. So if a company had a bigger army than the country, then it only makes sense that the country would do the bidding of that corporation, so that way that country, in the event of a war, could be able to rely on that corporation's army to help them fight that war. So you see how corporations and politicians have always kind of been tied together. Kind of see how that works, right? So this is why history is very important. Understanding the history of corporate structures is very, 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 very interesting. Now, let's talk about the United States, okay? The first corporations in the United States were small banking corporations, which began in the 1790s. Well, let's look at that, right? Small banking corporations. So you're telling me that the first corporation, right, in the United States was a banking corporation. Well, let's fast forward to 2020. Well, the Federal Reserve Bank right now is a private corporation, and the Federal Reserve Bank sets monetary policy for the United States. See how that works? See how it all ties together? This is important. Now, the first corporation of note, the first big corporation in the United States, was the Boston Manufacturing Company in 1813. It was a textile corporation, and it sparked the first industrial revolution in the United States. Now, hold on. We got to look into that. So the first major corporation was a manufacturing company. What does that mean? A textile manufacturing company. What does that mean, textile manufacturing company? A textile manufacturing company is a company that manufactures cloth to make clothes out of, right? Well, if you look back in the 1800s, what were most clothing made out of? Cotton. Kind of similar to today. Most clothing was made out of cotton. And if you look back in 1813, right? Slavery hadn't been abolished yet. The 13th Amendment wasn't signed until 1865. So where were they getting the cotton to manufacture these textiles? They were getting them from the South. And the South, because the South was the biggest cotton producer and exporter all over the United States. And we know that. And they also exported around the world. So now let's look at that. So what you're telling me is that indirectly, the first large corporation in the United States, the corporation that sparked the Industrial Revolution, made all of its profits indirectly off of the backs of African slavery. Ah, that's deep, isn't it? That's real deep, ain't it? When you really look at the history, like that's real deep, right? Yeah. So this is why I like history, and this is why I wanted to talk you through the history of this first, right? Because in order to understand how to grow a business in this country, you better understand the history of where these companies come from. So what we've learned so far, right, is number one, the first corporation ever created, right, was in England. We understand that corporation came over to Africa and exported Africans for slave labor to other parts of the world. They are the first example of the transatlantic slave operation. Okay. We learn that corporate structure was not introduced to us from an ownership standpoint, but from a commodity point. We were a product. So our first introduction to the corporate structure was as a product. That's a fact of life. We learn that the first corporations in the United States were banking corporations, and that the largest corporation, the first really large corporation in the United States, was a textile manufacturing company, which means they manufactured cloth for clothing. And since cloth was made from cotton, that means that they made their wealth indirectly off the backs of slavery. So we've always been a commodity in the corporate structure, right? So from the beginning of the history of corporations, Africans and African Americans have always been commodities. So we've been at a disadvantage and disenfranchised in the corporate structure since its inception. And we need to understand that. Because if you look at the way the laws are structured, let's fast forward to today, right? Because I'm sure a lot of you are wondering, well, how does this apply to us today? Okay, so let's look at it, right? It's real simple. So if you look at the laws, right? Someone once told me a long time ago, she was a diplomat actually, and she told me that the laws are interpreted for your friends and applied for your enemies. And I gotta be honest with you, I could not agree more. That's a fact of life. So when you look at laws, right, when you look at the way the laws are structured, and you got to understand this if you want to start and be successful at growing a business, the way the laws are structured, they were never structured with our benefit in mind. They were structured with our demise, which is why, when you look at prison populations, minorities make up the biggest demographic in the prison population system, right? So that's very important to understand too. So when you look at corporate laws and corporate structures, there's tons of them. State by state by state, and then there's federal laws too, right? They say the greatest place to hide a thing is in a book. They know that most people, especially minorities, don't read the laws. And because they don't read the laws, right, they never know if they've structured their business properly. And because they never know if they've structured their business properly, right, they always open themselves up to exposure, liability, the potential to have their business taken from them, or worse, end up in prison. So when you look at this, it's no wonder that, when you look at the banking system, that it's harder for African Americans to get business loans than it is for everyone else. It's not surprising when you look at the history, right? It's not surprising that it's difficult for African Americans to grow and scale a business in the United States when you look at the history, right? So my job now that we've looked at the history, my job is to simply teach you, right, how to structure a business the right way to keep you out of trouble. How to think about growing and scaling a business so you're able to succeed. So you're able to make the kind of money that you want to make and have the opportunity to grow your business, right? You know, some of the things we're going to cover, we're going to talk about some accounting principles along the way. You know, because accounting is very important. You got to understand that part of it. You know, so, you know, today's discussion was simply about, you know, the history. You know, I didn't want to take too much of your guys' time today. You know, I just wanted to give you a little background, a little history to help you understand that, you know, when you look at this business thing, you got to understand, you know, how it started, where it comes from, and how we've always been positioned in the situation. So if you want to flip the tables and be in a better position, then you have to understand the history, because if you don't know where you come from, it's hard to see where you're going next. And it's hard to change history and you know, make the future. Well, you can't change history, but it's hard to change the future. It's hard to change the future and make it possible for you to go from, you know, the pitted losing side of the situation to the winning side of the situation if you don't understand the history. You have to understand what's against you first. And then you can understand how to change what's against you, how to overcome what's against you, and how to thrive, how to survive and thrive in the business and corporate environment, right? Because you understand the history. You know who you're dealing with. You got to know who you're dealing with first. See, 48 Laws of Power teaches you that if you don't know, you know, if you don't know yourself, you know, well, let's back into that. So 48 Laws of Power says, know yourself, know your enemy, right? So if you don't know yourself, right, but you know your enemy, odds are 50-50 that it's going to work out for you. If you know yourself, but you don't know your enemy, it's the same 50-50. If you don't know either, I mean, well, you're 100% lost. But if you know yourself and you know your enemy, you have a much better chance. You may lose a few battles, but in the end, you'll win the war, because you understand who you're dealing with, you understand what you're dealing with, you understand the landscape, and you're able to strategically plan for victory. That's how it works. And again, two entities in a war, you know, just because one person declares victory, war isn't over until both people are done fighting. Let's be very clear about that, right? So that's that. So I see I've got a question here. Let me go ahead and take a question. Okay, so Contis asked, do you have any book recommendations to learn more on this topic? You know, a simple Google research, a Google search will go a long way toward, you know, understanding, you know, this situation here, right? You know, when I was preparing for this course, you know, I was doing my outline. I just did a simple Google search. What was the first American corporation? What was the first American corporation? What was the first corporation that was created, you know, in the world? And I got a little background and a little history, and I dug into it a little bit. You know what I mean? Right? So, you know, like, I wanted to make sure that I had the dates and times right. I know the history well, but I wanted to make sure that I had the dates and times right. So I did a simple Google search, right? To make sure my dates and times were accurate. You know, so that's it. Like, it's just, look, Google. Let me tell you something about Google. Boy, Google is the largest free library in the history of the planet. Period. Anything you want to know, trust me, it's on Google if you put the right key terms in and you know what to search for. Anything. I spend more time on Google, more time on different types of, like, YouTube, and, you know, like, then I might see something interesting that I read, and then there may be some book references. So I'll go to, like, you know, my Barnes & Noble's Nook app and get the book, or I'll take a trip to the library and get the book and read the book. But most of this stuff, the surface level of this stuff, a lot of it's available on Google. Of course, yes, you can do some further reading. Like, you know, I've recommended a couple of books over the series of these courses that I've been doing, such as The Ascent of Money by Niall Ferguson. The Creature from Jekyll Island is a great book. A Random Walk Down Wall Street by Burton G. McHale is a great book. The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene is a great book. Let's see, what else? Intelligent Investor by Benjamin Graham is a great book. Security Analysis by Benjamin Graham is a great book. I mean, you know, Niccolo Machiavelli wrote a couple of good books. The Prince, I think one's called The Prince. That's a really good book. Right. So, no, and the Contis said that sometimes it's difficult to discern what's credible and what's not. But thanks, Fred. Yeah, no, that's a fact, right? So, you know, anytime you do research, and just to give you a little basics on research, right? Anytime you do research, if you can't corroborate something you've read from at least 5 other sources, it's probably not credible. That's real. If I read a thing and I find that thing to be very, very interesting and I think it has some merit, I corroborate it with 3, 4, 5 independent different sources. If I can find the same thing by 5 different independent sources that are not linked together, then I take it as credible. Right? But I do deep dives and deep research, right? So, that's very important. It's very, very important. And that's a very important thing that you need to do, right? Like, if you hire a CPA and a CPA tells you something, get a second opinion from 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 other CPAs. Oftentimes CPAs and lawyers will at least give you a free introductory call, a free consultation where you can ask some questions. And you can see, if 3 or 4 or 5, unassociated CPAs or law firms are telling you the same thing, then the person you're considering to hire knows what they're talking about. But if those other people are telling you something diametrically opposed to the person you're considering hiring, then you might not want to hire that person because obviously they don't know what they're talking about. It's very straightforward. It's very straightforward. In 2020, knowledge cannot be obfuscated. That means it cannot be hidden. Knowledge is not hidden anymore. It's not in the hollow halls of this place or the hollow halls of that place or none of that. It's not like that anymore. Google opened up the doors. You just have to be willing to take the time to do the research and reading. So I'm going to stop there and I'm going to open the floor up for questions. I've been talking about 30 minutes now, so I just want to open the floor up for questions and give people the opportunity to ask questions at this point. So that way, I can answer any questions that you have. So, floor is yours, guys. Okay, so I feel like there are no questions. So, that means either I did a good job, I've lost people, or people just don't want to ask a question because they don't want to feel like, they don't want to feel silly. So to the first, if I did a good job, that's great. Thanks, y'all. That's the goal. If I did a horrible job, please correct me and ask some questions so that way I can, get it right. And on that note, the other thing is, the only dumb question is the one you don't ask. Always feel free to ask questions. Like I open the floor up for questions because I want to make sure that the things that I'm teaching, the things that you're learning are well understood, because they're foundational points, for moving forward. It's not, I'm sorry, somebody said, no shave November. Okay. So yeah, as in no shave November, listen, I had a long, stressful week. I am wearing it on my face right now. Y'all gotta work with your boy today. Work with your boy today. And thank you, Nita. Thank you. I appreciate that. So with that in mind, listen, I'm going to save this video because I know some people came in late, right? So I save all my videos to my IG and, I'm a little bit behind on loading them up to YouTube. Y'all work with me. a little bit. You know what I mean? I promise you they're going to get to YouTube. They're going to make it there eventually. I promise. All right? So look, check this out. As I always say, right? Yo, bruh, just before I say this, I need to tell y'all, man, y'all gave me life today. Y'all don't even understand. Y'all gave me life today. Like, man, real talk. Like, I had a really long week, man. My younger brother, like my baby brother is going through so much right now. And, it all hit me. I didn't know how bad it was. And like, that's why I had to cancel class last week, y'all. And I apologize for that. But, my little brother going through right now. And, it's a family difficulty. And being the oldest, I got to step in and try to, save him from himself, if that makes sense. So, it's been a long, trying, stressful week, but I appreciate y'all for letting me talk to y'all today. Y'all gave me life. Y'all don't even know it. Like, y'all gave me life. Like this, I feel a lot better right now just being able to speak to y'all and do a little teaching and, a little educating. So I really appreciate y'all for listening to me, taking the time to hear what I have to say. You know what I mean? I know that, some of the things I say, a lot of the things I say help you guys, but you guys don't understand that sometimes you guys help me too just by being present. You know what I mean? Like, so I just want to thank y'all for that. But with that said, you know, now I'm going to tell y'all what I always tell y'all. Like, subscribe, share, follow, hit that notification button, you know, so you know when I'm going live. And as always, tell somebody that you think can benefit from the knowledge that I'm giving out. Because at the end of the day, the more people that see it, right, the more people can benefit from it. And as always, is hashtag fun and free. I love it. All right, y'all. Y'all have a great day. If you have any questions regarding the content from today, please feel free to reach out to me on IG. As I said before, this video will be saved on my IG, so you'll be able to rewatch it as many times as you'd like. And aside from that, like, you know, hit me up on IG if you have questions. I'm always, you know, responsive. I may not respond right away, but I will always get back to y'all. So I'm going to see y'all next week. You know what I mean? We're going to start getting into the nuts and bolts of setting up corporate structures, the pros, the cons, all of that. We're going to talk about that next week. We're going to get at it, baby. So I'll holler at y'all. Y'all enjoy y'all weekend, and I'll talk to y'all next week. I'll holler at y'all.